Imagine waking up one day and realizing the silence around you isn't accidental. The messages you didn't send. The invitations you quietly declined. The conversations that now feel heavier than they should. Nothing dramatic happened. No betrayal. No argument. No clean break. And yet, somehow, you've begun to drift. Slowly. Deliberately. Almost instinctively. Here's the paradox that unsettles you. The more deeply you think, the harder it becomes to stay close to people. Not because you hate them. Not because you think you're better. But because something inside you has shifted, and you can't quite explain it without sounding cold, arrogant, or broken. You start noticing it in small moments. A friend talks passionately about success, and you hear fear beneath the ambition. Someone complains about their life, but you sense their resistance to change. A conversation circles the same surface-level jokes, the same recycled outrage, the same borrowed opinions, and you feel yourself fading out, not out of boredom, but out of exhaustion. Why does awareness feel like a kind of exile? You didn't choose this distance consciously. If anything, you fought it. You tried to stay engaged. You nodded. You laughed at the right moments. You learned the choreography of normalcy. But inside, a question kept pressing harder. Is this all there is to say? Deep thinkers don't withdraw because they lack empathy. They withdraw because they have too much of it. You feel what others don't want to confront. You hear the unsaid tension beneath polite words. You sense contradictions people spend their lives running from. And once you see these things, it becomes harder to unsee them, to pretend conversations are just conversations, relationships just relationships, life just life. There's another contradiction, even more disturbing. The clearer your inner world becomes, the lonelier your outer world feels. You understand yourself more deeply than ever, yet feel increasingly misunderstood. You can articulate complexity, nuance, and uncertainty, but the world around you rewards certainty, speed, and simplicity. So you begin to pull back. Not dramatically, not with declarations, but with quiet adjustments. You speak less. You listen more. You choose solitude not because you despise people, but because solitude feels honest. In silence, you don't have to compress your thoughts into digestible sound bites. You don't have to dilute truth to protect comfort. You don't have to perform. And then comes the guilt. You wonder if something is wrong with you. Why can't you just be normal? Why do social interactions drain you instead of energize you? Why does depth feel incompatible with closeness? You notice how most relationships are built on shared distractions rather than shared understanding, on mutual avoidance rather than mutual inquiry, on agreement rather than exploration. And once you realize this, it becomes harder to participate without feeling like you're betraying yourself. But here's the question that lingers beneath all of this, the one you're almost afraid to ask. What if this distancing isn't a flaw, but a consequence? What if thinking deeply about life, about meaning, suffering, death, freedom, responsibility, inevitably changes how you relate to people who haven't gone there yet? What if awareness doesn't just expand your mind, but quietly redraws the map of your relationships? You begin to sense that most people aren't really talking to each other. They're defending identities, performing roles, protecting narratives that keep existential anxiety at bay. And when you stop needing those narratives, when you start questioning the stories you were handed, you also stop fitting neatly into the social fabric woven from them. That's when the distance grows. Not because you're disconnected from humanity, but because you're too close to its contradictions. And the most unsettling part? You can't go back. Once you've tasted depth, surface-level living feels hollow. Once you've stared into the uncomfortable questions, small talk feels like static. Once you've seen how fragile most beliefs are, certainty feels suspicious. So you stand at a quiet crossroads, remain connected by pretending you don't see what you see, or accept the slow solitude that comes with seeing clearly. This is where the real problem begins, not the distance itself, but the hidden forces that cause it. Forces rooted deep in psychology, philosophy, and the unspoken rules of society. Forces that don't just separate deep thinkers from others, but reshape who they become in the process. And to understand why this distancing happens, you have to look beneath the silence. The distance doesn't begin with arrogance. It begins with perception. Once you start thinking deeply, you notice something most people unconsciously avoid. The majority of human interaction is not about truth, but about psychological safety. Conversations aren't exchanges of understanding, they're negotiations of identity. People speak not to discover what is real, but to protect who they believe they are. Carl Jung warned that most individuals live inside what he called the persona, a carefully constructed mask designed to gain acceptance and avoid rejection. The deeper you think, the more clearly you see these masks. You recognize when someone is performing confidence to hide insecurity, optimism to suppress despair, certainty to outrun fear. And once you see it, participating starts to feel dishonest. This is the hidden problem. Deep thinking threatens the psychological defenses that hold social life together. Society is not built on truth, it's built on manageable illusions. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this when he wrote that humans need lies in order to live. Most people unconsciously agree to a shared fiction. We won't question the foundations too hard if you don't make us. We'll bond over distractions, ambitions, and surface-level meaning, as long as no one pulls the curtain back too far. But deep thinkers do pull the curtain. They ask questions that destabilize comfort. Why do we want what we want? Why are we afraid of silence? Why do we chase meaning externally instead of confronting emptiness internally? Arthur Schopenhauer believed that increased awareness leads inevitably to suffering, not because the world becomes worse, but because illusion dissolves. The deep thinker doesn't suddenly become pessimistic. They become lucid. And lucidity is isolating in a world that runs on sedation. Psychologically, this creates friction. Humans are tribal by nature. Belonging depends on shared assumptions. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that most people live in bad faith, lying to themselves to avoid the burden of freedom and responsibility. When you stop doing this, you unknowingly violate an unspoken social contract. Your questions feel like threats. Your silence feels like judgment, even when none is intended. So people pull away. Or you do. Not because anyone is malicious, but because depth introduces tension. You can't easily bond over trivialities once you've confronted mortality. You can't wholeheartedly celebrate shallow victories once you've questioned the value system that defines success. You can't unsee how much of daily life is driven by fear of insignificance. Viktor Frankl observed that meaning is not something invented, it's something discovered through responsibility. Deep thinkers sense this intuitively. They feel the weight of existence more intensely. And that weight changes how they speak, how they listen, how they relate. The result is a quiet alienation. You begin to feel out of sync. Conversations move too fast or too shallow. Emotional exchanges feel scripted. Social rituals feel rehearsed rather than lived. And the more honest you become internally, the harder it is to mirror the unconscious patterns that sustain group harmony. This is not superiority. It's misalignment. And here's the unsettling truth beneath it all. Society subtly discourages depth because depth destabilizes control. A deeply thinking individual is harder to manipulate, harder to pacify, harder to fit into predictable roles. So the world rewards conformity and punishes introspection, not overtly, but socially. Which brings us to the next layer of the problem. Because this distance doesn't stay philosophical. It leaks into behavior, emotions, identity itself. It reshapes how you move through the world in ways you don't immediately notice. And the consequences, personal and collective, are far more profound than simple loneliness. The distance begins quietly, but it doesn't remain neutral. Over time, it reshapes you. At first, you simply feel different. Then you start to feel invisible. Not ignored exactly, just untranslated. Like you're speaking a language others no longer hear. You express nuance. The world responds with absolutes. You offer questions. It demands answers. And slowly, you learn to say less, not because you have nothing to say, but because you sense it won't land. This is where the unseen consequences take root. Psychologically, your mind adapts to protect itself. The brain is efficient, it avoids repeated friction. When attempts at depth are met with confusion, dismissal, or discomfort, your nervous system learns restraint. You withdraw not as a choice, but as conditioning. Over time, introspection replaces expression. Observation replaces participation. Cognitive biases intensify the gap. The false consensus effect makes most people assume their worldview is shared. When yours isn't, you feel like an anomaly. The availability heuristic reinforces surface-level thinking. What's loud, emotional, and immediate dominates discourse, while subtlety gets lost. And the social conformity bias pressures you to either blend in or fade out. So you fade. Neurologically, depth increases sensitivity. Studies in psychology show that highly reflective individuals often experience heightened emotional and sensory processing. You don't just think more, you feel more. Noise becomes draining. Repetition becomes suffocating. Performative interaction becomes exhausting. The world begins to feel too loud for a mind that craves coherence rather than stimulation. This is how solitude stops being a preference and starts feeling like relief. But relief has a shadow. Without realizing it, you begin to romanticize isolation. You tell yourself you're better alone, that people are shallow, that connection is overrated. This isn't entirely true, but it feels true because isolation is predictable, and predictability feels safe. Carl Jung warned that when the inner world grows too dominant, the outer world begins to feel unreal, even unnecessary. The danger isn't loneliness. It's detachment. On a societal level, the consequences multiply. Deep thinkers disengage from public discourse, leaving the loudest voices to dominate culture. Complexity vanishes. Polarization intensifies. Ideas get flattened into slogans. And the very people capable of nuance retreat, convinced their presence doesn't matter, or worse, that it's futile. Individually, identity begins to shift. You stop seeing yourself as one of them, and start seeing yourself as an observer of humanity. This can feel empowering at first, clarity without illusion. But over time, it risks eroding empathy. Not because you care less, but because constant understanding without reciprocity becomes emotionally unsustainable. You start anticipating misunderstanding before it happens. You preemptively withdraw. You assume depth will isolate you, so you isolate yourself first. This is the trap. The world didn't exile you. Awareness did, but only partially. The rest was habit, defense, self-protection disguised as philosophy. And yet, something inside you resists fully disappearing. A quiet tension remains. You don't want shallow connection, but you don't want sterile solitude either. You sense there must be another way, but you can't see it yet. Because the solution isn't about finding better people. It's about dismantling a false assumption you've been carrying. And to do that, you'll need something radical, not another insight, but a rebellion against the very narrative that made depth feel like a curse. The rebellion doesn't begin by moving closer to people. It begins by dismantling the story you've been telling yourself about distance. Here is the radical shift most deep thinkers miss. Isolation is not proof of depth, it is a phase of it. A necessary one, but not a permanent identity. You withdrew to protect your mind, to clarify your values, to strip away illusion. That part mattered. But staying there too long quietly turns insight into avoidance. The rebellion is choosing engagement without surrender. History is filled with thinkers who face this same dilemma. Nietzsche walked alone for years, but his ideas were never meant to stay locked in solitude. They were provocations, meant to collide with the world. Viktor Frankl endured the deepest isolation imaginable, yet emerged with a philosophy rooted not in detachment, but responsibility toward others. Even the Stoics, often misunderstood as emotionally distant, believed wisdom existed to be practiced in community, not hidden from it. The mistake is believing you must choose between depth and connection. You don't. But connection has to be redefined. Breaking free doesn't mean forcing yourself into shallow spaces that drain you. It means learning a different mode of presence, one that doesn't require translation or performance. You stop trying to be understood by everyone and start being legible to the few who are receptive. You trade intensity for precision. Fewer words, truer ones. This is where the rebellion becomes internal. Instead of withdrawing when conversations feel shallow, you practice subtle depth. You ask better questions rather than offering better answers. You listen for the fracture in what's being said and gently reflect it back, not to expose, but to invite. Most people have depth buried under fear, not absence. When someone feels safe, complexity surfaces. And when it doesn't, you let it go, without contempt. Another counterintuitive shift: you stop waiting for others to meet you at your level. That expectation is a hidden form of pride masquerading as loneliness. Real depth doesn't demand recognition. It operates quietly, confidently, without needing validation. Psychologically, this reclaims agency. You're no longer reacting to the world's limitations. You're choosing how to engage with them. You accept that misunderstanding is part of being human, not a verdict on your isolation. You also learn to externalize your depth. Writing, teaching, creating, building something that holds complexity without requiring constant interpersonal translation. Many thinkers reconnect with humanity not through conversation, but contribution. Through expression that doesn't depend on immediate approval. This is how you step out of the observer role and back into participation. Not as someone deluded, not as someone superior, but as someone integrated. And slowly, something unexpected happens. The distance that once felt like exile begins to feel like choice. The silence becomes spacious, not empty. Connection becomes intentional, not obligatory. Which prepares you for the final realization, the one that changes how you see your solitude, your relationships, and yourself entirely. Here is the truth most deep thinkers arrive at, but rarely articulate. You didn't distance yourself from people. You outgrew unconscious connection. The loneliness was never the price of thinking deeply. It was the transition between two ways of relating to the world. One based on reflex, roles, and reassurance. The other based on presence, responsibility, and choice. This is the realization that reframes everything. Depth doesn't isolate you from humanity. It returns you to it, stripped of illusion. Most people connect to avoid themselves. Deep thinkers learn to connect after confronting themselves. That difference changes the texture of every interaction. You no longer seek belonging to feel real. You feel real first, then choose where belonging makes sense. This is why relationships fell away. They were built on versions of you that no longer exist. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote that freedom is terrifying because it removes our excuses. Once you see clearly, you can't unsee. Once you understand your motives, you can't blame ignorance. Once you recognize the weight of existence, you can't hide behind distraction. And when you stop hiding, many connections dissolve, not out of cruelty, but incompatibility. The ultimate shift is realizing that solitude was not punishment, it was calibration. It taught you how to listen without needing noise, how to think without needing applause, how to exist without constant reflection from others. And now, having passed through it, you're no longer ruled by distance or closeness. You're guided by alignment. This is where connection changes form. You stop chasing intensity and start valuing resonance. You recognize that most people won't walk with you, and that's not a tragedy. It's geometry. Different trajectories, different depths, different timing. The world was never meant to be experienced uniformly. Viktor Frankl believed meaning arises when we take responsibility for something greater than ourselves. The deepest thinkers eventually realize that their role is not to escape humanity, but to meet it without illusion, to engage without attachment, to care without dependence. And when you do this, something quiet but profound happens. You become a stable presence. People feel less judged around you, not because you hide your depth, but because you no longer need to prove it. Your silence becomes welcoming rather than distant. Your words carry weight because they're chosen, not reactive. You no longer fear losing people, because you know connection is not something to cling to. It's something to cultivate, release, and rediscover in new forms. The paradox resolves itself. Depth didn't push you away from others. It taught you how to stand alone, so you could finally stand with them, without losing yourself. And from that place, every connection becomes intentional. Every silence becomes meaningful. Every interaction becomes a choice, not a compromise. That is the quiet power of the deep thinker. Not distance, but clarity.